Hey everyone, I wanted to share a video today about MAPS. For the last 6 years I've been practicing movement, and I remember before I even got started and found movement, I didn't have a map of the landscape to even understand physicality, to see the bigger picture and to understand the possibilities, the capabilities of what I could practice, what was movement. And this has kind of been a reoccurring theme. I mean, even in my writing, I have not followed a map, but I do think maps can be extremely useful and they can help organize chaos. So I remember before I even got started in movement, I was looking all over the internet, just finding new things, novel things that I hadn't experienced, that I thought that I was interested in, be it dance, be it fitness. I remember searching Instagram and seeing all these different influencers doing all different kinds of things, and each of them were very strong, very sculpted, and one might be doing some pull-ups, one might be doing some sit-ups, one's doing planks. And I thought, well, what do I do? What patterns do I choose to practice, and why? So I never really got a good answer for this, at least in my own research. And it wasn't until very recently that I've came across a model that is not even mine, but shared through Ido Portal, who's my teacher's teacher. And I find that these kinds of maps can really help organize someone's practice. It can give you a better understanding of what you are capable of and what you might need help in, where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. In business school, we took things like the Myers-Briggs test, and one could consider that as a map for personality. One of many maps. And so the map that I'm sharing today is one of many maps. There is no perfect map that maps onto reality. There's a saying that we like to share that all maps are wrong, but some are useful. And I think that's the case for this map that I'm going to share today. And just in the writing world, there's many different ways to write a book. There's many models, many perspectives on how to organize Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. Some people think there should be 5 acts, 6 acts. There's many different perspectives. So I think what's even more important, and this comes down to the limitations of a map, and it's very windy right now, so I hope you can bear with me. But one of the limitations of a map is that it's not reality. It's not our direct experience. It's not... One can memorize all the maps that they want, but unless you've been there, unless you've experienced it directly, then you don't know. And in fact, map making should, in my opinion, be directed from the inside out rather than the outside in. So after having experienced a particular location, let's say in the real world, then you can begin to map it. But let's get into this map. Ido calls it the 5 pillars of movement. Each of these pillars represents some possibility, some area of practice within movement. The first is the somatic pillar, and one could consider this a meta pillar that bleeds into everything. The somatic pillar is sensing oneself, sensing the sensations that arise in the body, observing all phenomena, whether it be anything that arises through the doors of the 5 senses or through proprioception, interoception, just being able to sense oneself in space. There's many different practices involved in this specific pillar. So one could choose Feldenkrais, for instance, lying down on one's back, and there's all sorts of different techniques involved in Feldenkrais. That could be something to look into. One that's particularly pertinent for my experience has been Vipassana meditation, sensing one's body in seated position, scanning the body from head to toe, and gathering what insights can arise from that. So the somatic pillar is just one pillar within this bigger thing that we're calling movement. But it's a very important one, and I think the more accurately that we can sense ourselves, the more accurately that maps onto whatever other experiences or whatever other pillars we choose to participate in, we choose to practice. And that's why it's called what I would consider a meta pattern, just like meditation, I think, is a meta practice that extends to all practices. The next pillar is the acrobatic pillar. This is dealing with forces. So this could be ground reactive force in the case of jumping and landing, or gravity in such cases. Anything that, we're experiencing some sort of liftoff or landing. So some certain containers for this pillar could be soft acrobatics, gentle cartwheels, or it could even be anything from flipping to aerials to tricking. All of these could be considered one domain of practice, one pillar that you can explore. And there's a lot there. I think the acrobatic pillar, it feels very alive. So if you're feeling dead in your practice, then this is one that can bring a youthful quality to who you are and what you're looking for. I think this is one of the first pillars to fall off in people's practices. Is they stop jumping, they stop really exerting themselves in dynamic ways. So you see a child and they're walking down the street and there's a puddle and they jump over it. Well, an old man might walk down the street and go around it. And I think that says something about the capacity and the capability of one's aliveness in their joints, in their ligamentous tissue, their muscular tissue. So yeah, I think this is a really nice pillar to explore. The third pillar, we could say, is martial work. So working with others, and not in the sense of martial arts necessarily, but this is quite a common way of exploring the martial practice. You could say through jiu-jitsu, through fighting, through boxing, through tactical work. But it doesn't have to be just martial arts. It could be, let's say, some sort of dance component could be mixed in. You see contact improv could be one example. But anything that's requiring an external source to engage with would be considered part of this martial pillar. I've been seeing this word thrown around more and more as this idea of something being ecological. So being in the environment and dealing with whatever variables arise that are outside of your control. I think this is a very important practice for us to build community around. It can be really easy to, I think, either only have an individual practice where we have no community, or we have a community practice where we have no individual practice. And I think some combination of the two provides the best outcomes. At least that's been my experience. The next pillar is something we just kind of brought up is the dance pillar. Dance being the abstraction of ideas, or the embodiment of abstract ideas. So taking qualities like waves, spirals, circles, and bringing them into the body. So these are just ideas, but they can be acted out in the real world. Anything having to do with any quality at all, really, or any idea can be contained within the dance pillar. Yeah, I mean, there's so many different kinds of dances, so many different ways to move the body, thinking of embodying different ideas in the spine, in the arms, and in the legs are usually one great way to approach it. Maybe someone has consciousness and is very vibrant in their spine, but might not have reactive legs, or might not have reactive arms, or responsive arms, or dynamic arms. So exploring the dance pillar is a really beautiful, personally one of my favorites. Yeah, it's so deep, and there's so much there that I think if you haven't explored this pillar, it's worth your time. And there's also, within the dance pillar, one thing I think I appreciate a lot is the ability to arrive directly rather than progressively. So dance can be something that is progressively built upon, but each of us has the ability to express where we're at in any given moment and enjoy the fruits that come with that expression. So I think that's worth experiencing. We all used to dance when we were young. We danced at certain events, be it weddings, be it parties, but I think dancing alone or dancing with a partner can yield a lot different effects. And also at the same time, there is a process that can be built in order to improve in quality if that's what one desires. So we've gone through the somatic pillar, the martial pillar, the acrobatic pillar. The next pillar we can go over is the object pillar, or object manipulation, as Ito calls it. So anything having to do with working with objects, traditionally we would see anything dealing with, let's say, lifting a bar over the head, or lifting a bar over the chest presses, pull-ups, things like this we might consider strength work. But another perspective that we can see this kind of work through is the lens of those things being objects, that we're then manipulating our bodies around the objects, or vice versa, manipulating the objects around our bodies. Another example could be anything dealing with tennis balls, any ball in general, sports, basketball, tennis, juggling even. One that I've worked on is stick balancing a stick at the end of your fingertips all the way up to your shoulder, and on other parts of the body as well. The foot, for instance. Don't get any other ideas about that. But yeah, anything dealing with objects is I think that pillar gets very often revealed to be a weakness in practices like yoga, where there's not a lot of dynamic movement happening. There's more so just balancing the body, contorting it into different shapes. And not to knock on yoga, but there are, through whichever discipline we've chosen, or many disciplines that we've chosen, we can begin to see that discipline through the lens of the 5 pillars and see its limitations, because it's not working with all 5. Maybe it's working with 2, maybe it's working with 3 of them. in some cases 4, but perhaps not all 5. So it becomes a really nice way to examine ourselves and what kinds of physicalities we're choosing to practice in, while we're embodying in the world. So yeah, those are 4 of the pillars: somatic, martial, object work, acrobatic, and the last one, dance. So I believe we talked about all 5. I'll have to rewatch the video. But yeah, I hope this helps. Again, having a map has been instrumental in my own development as a movement practitioner. It's been useful at times in writing as well. Like I said, I'm currently writing a fiction book, and I've wanted to write that from the unconscious, from just whatever arises in my own experience, but also realizing that the unconscious is built off of previously existing perspectives that can be mapped. And once we learn the map, we can see what pieces we're missing, and we can begin to fill in the gaps. We can see our own weaknesses and move into those if we so desire, or we can double down on our strengths. That's another perspective. So yeah, the 5 pillars of movement, I think, is a really nice and all-encompassing map. Again, the map is not the territory. The map is not reality. I hope that it's useful, but please don't get lost in any of these maps. Keep contending with reality. And if reality seems too disorganized, at that point we can refer back to the maps and create some organization based on the chaos and the lack thereof of having an organized process. In the same way that as I was writing the first draft of my book, it was completely chaotic. And that's how I wanted it. I wanted it to come from myself. But at a certain point, I sought the help of an editor, someone who understands structure, the map of a story, and can point to things that I don't see. So again, this was one map. One more map that I'm going to point out and bring up is the 4 phases of tissue. I think seeing through the lens of this map can once again help you notice which phases you might be lacking in your own practice and help you fill in the gaps. The first phase of tissue would be stiffness. So anything isometrically held, anything tensile, or tensile is the next phase, but stiffness could be like holding a plank, for instance, in yoga, or remaining in one posture, one position for some time. This is just one phase of tissue that provides a lot of use. At times we do need to be stiff in our bodies. We might need to hold our ground. We might need to remain still and create a structure that can support itself. So stiffness is very useful. But also stiffness can be a great limitation if it's the only quality of tissue that we're able to access. Think of a stiff old man who can't move, or who's only has access to a couple positions. Not a good time. But the next phase of tissue is tensile. You can think of tensile as anything in regards to bodybuilding, weightlifting, the ability to flex and contract muscles, tissue. Something that is not so dynamic, which would be getting into next phases of tissue. But something where we're transitioning shapes, but still there's some structure that's maintained within the tissue. It's being lengthened, it's being shortened, it's being contracted, it's being softened. this is more of the tensile quality of tissues that many practices operate in. Yoga would be one of them. Although the tensile nature of phases also bleeds into many disciplines, many sports. You could think of holding positions in different martial arts. But the next phase is, I think, missing from a lot of practices, which is the dynamic phase, the elastic phase of tissue. The ability for tissue to react and respond in ways that are not static, ways that are not tense. You could think of anything that's global movements of the body, like throwing, jumping, landing, kicking, anything that requires snapping the body, throwing different limbs. This is one phase of tissue that's lacking from some practices, and some practices really have a good hold on this. So very, very, like, let's say in rock climbing, you might have dynos, but apart from that, there's not a lot of elastic jumps going on or movements, at least in a beginner's practice. Again, dynamic tissue, it needs the foundation of stiffness and the tensile quality to be able to get into dynamic positions. It helps it. But also, too much stiffness and too much tensility can limit elasticity. So there's relationships that's formed between each. And then the final phase of tissue is colloidal, the ability for the tissue to reverberate at the end of anything elastic. So you think of like this jello-like reverberation quality that filters through the tissue or gets sent through the tissue on the far end of anything dynamic, which is harder to practice in and of itself without elasticity. So when you look at the movement landscape through the lens of the 4 phases of tissue, you can start to see in your own body which phases you're lacking, which phases you would like practice in, and it begins to create different questions, different examinations, different observations about oneself. So yeah, I hope these 2 maps helped. I hope they helped. They've been useful for me in regards to directing my own practice, in regards to how I see physicality, how I see others showing up. There's a beauty to maps, and also don't get lost. Don't get lost in the maps, and also don't get lost in reality either. Maps can be useful for that. All right, I hope this was useful. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. There wasn't a lot of planning to this video, so I think it came out a bit rambly. But I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.